What's up, guys? 2 winning days in a row. Finally able to string multiple winning days in a row together once again. Who'd have thought, even though it was a smallish win yesterday, a 3-2 day all in college basketball. Uh, really, I think the Citadel maybe should have gotten there. I mean, they were kind of hanging within that number for a while. It was kind of surprising, though, that number shot way up to like 7. Like, I think I took it at 5.5 or something. At the point where it gets up to all the way to 7, it's like, there's so much value in that it's like, how can you not take that, especially when you like the spot? They were hanging around within that number. And statistically, I think they should have probably been able to do it. I haven't looked since last night, but I think that they had like more shot attempts than Mercer. It was a game statistically. A lot of the stats other than that were close. Statistically, I think it was a game where Citadel should have come within the number. Just did not happen. I think they lost by 9. And then the other game, New Mexico, it looked like New Mexico was going to get there. They had a decent-sized lead for almost the entire second half. They could have put it away. It looked like they were probably going to get there, especially I laid the 5.5 on that one, and the line was all the way up to like 7.5, 8 by the time the game tipped off. I mean, that's just extreme. That's insane. There's no way I would have wanted to lay that number, but at 5.5, I thought it was pretty good, pretty comfortable, and they were winning by more than that for a lot of the second half. Never really had a lead greater than maybe about 8 or 9, though, but it still looked like they might get there, and then all of a sudden they just kind of blew it right near the end there, and then all of a sudden it's like a tied game, and I think they were losing by 1, and I think they hit a 3 to win the game right at the end when they were down 1. At that point, I was just hoping for overtime, like just give me an extended game here, and maybe they'll be able to actually win by that margin, but that was not going to happen. They wound up winning and not covering, but like I said, New Mexico, I think maybe they should have covered just because they had the lead for most of the second half and were winning by just above that margin for a lot of it. But moving on to today, I think I'm being a bit more selective today because there are some games of college basketball where I kind of like the spot, and some of these smaller conference games, and I'm just not going to do it on a lot of these, man. Like, I don't like the spot for UT Martin. UT Martin just beat Morehead State, who is the best team in the Ohio Valley. UT Martin sitting in second place in the Ohio Valley, may actually be the second best team in the conference. I haven't looked at KenPom's ratings as far as that's concerned, but coming off a big win over Morehead State, and that's a big win, man. Now they go on the road to face Lindenwood, who is at the bottom of the conference. It's got to be kind of a letdown spot for UT Martin, and UT Martin already beat Lindenwood at home, although they only beat them by 9, and probably Lindenwood actually covered. It was a wire-to-wire win for UT Martin, so maybe they just didn't really push it or whatever and just got out of there with the win, didn't really care that much. I think they were an 11.5-point favorite in that one. On the road here, they are a big favorite, and they 8.5. So based on the fact that they're up from, it looks like 7.5 to 8.5, so I kind of really don't want to be on that one. It looks like the 8.5, though. I mean, if they were 11.5 at home, 8.5 is just really high. Like, of course, we've gotten more information since then, and I think since that game we probably have increased UT Martin's rankings have been and decreased Lindenwood's. Lindenwood's one of the worst teams in the country. Like, KenPom has them almost at the very, very bottom. He has them as the 5th worst team in the entire country, worse than Detroit Mercy, even though Detroit Mercy only has 1 win. So I just don't want to touch it. I just can't trust Lindenwood there, even though I would only lean to that side and taking the points. I think it's a letdown spot for UT Martin, but I just can't get there. But that 11.5 spread that was there in the first game would kind of indicate that this line should be closer to maybe 6, 6.5. Although, of course, like I said, we've realized some more things about these teams since then. And UT Martin's better than we think that they are, and Lindenwood's probably worse than what we think they are. So, it's also possible that the line in that first game was actually a little bit short. KenPom has this at 9, so pretty close to where the 8.5 is there, but I'm not doing it. Spending too much time talking about these games that I don't even want to touch. I also do not like the spot that let me see here. What was I even going to say? I don't like the spot that Kansas City is in either. UMKC. They just beat South Dakota State at home. South Dakota State, probably the best team in the conference, even though they're a half game behind North Dakota right now. I think KenPom probably has South Dakota State rated the best team in the Summit, although it's kind of close. None of these teams are really that good. But I think it's a little bit of a letdown for UMKC coming off that big win, or Kansas City, coming off that big win over South Dakota State, who everybody knows is one of the better teams in the conference. That was also revenge for KC for a loss at South Dakota State earlier this year. Now they play South Dakota, who the only time they played them this year, they beat South Dakota by 24 at home. So it's possible they just overlook South Dakota, who is at the very bottom of the conference. I think it's kind of a letdown spot for KC. I'm just not going to be able to quite do it there, but the line looks like it's up from 1.5 to 2 or something like that. Let me see here. South Dakota up from 1 to 2.5. So the line looks like it's moving on UMKC, which I just don't quite understand. Let me see what KenPom's got here on this one. Both of these teams are bad. I just don't want to get involved. He's got South Dakota way near the bottom. He's got UMKC winning by 2. I'm not going to touch it, but I do think it is a slight letdown for UMKC. And then the other game that I kind of looked at briefly and had my eye on, I think Cal Baptist, they're not in a good spot because they just played Grand Canyon, who's the best team in the WAC, really tough. Cal Baptist was in that game pretty much the whole time, didn't go away, and I think it was still tied with like very little time left in the game, tied with like 2 minutes left in the game. Big performance from Cal Baptist, and now coming off of that near win, like just a miss against Grand Canyon, who's definitely the best team in the WAC. I don't even think it's that close. That was a big performance from Cal Baptist. Now, coming off that, they have a second straight road game going to Abilene Christian, who's near the bottom of the conference, and a team they already beat by 15 at home. So they might take them kind of lightly here, and it sets up a revenge spot for Abilene Christian and Cal Baptist, who is actually 4th in the conference right now, I think, or 5th, actually. They also have Tarleton State up after this, then Stephen F. Austin, who's right behind them in the conference and basically tied with them in the conference. Tarleton State in 2nd in the conference, although I think they're overrated, as I keep saying. I don't think they're as good as their record looks, but that kind of makes this a sandwich spot for Cal Baptist, man, coming off such a huge performance at Grand Canyon. Now a second straight road game at Abilene Christian with the second team in the conference standings up next in the WAC, Tarleton State. Not a good spot there for Cal Baptist. And this line is flipped from Abilene Christian being a 1.5 point dog all the way over to a 3-point favorite. I think it's getting a little far there. I would not want to lay 3 with Abilene Christian, but I only lean to the Abilene Christian side here. KenPom has them losing this game by 1. So I think if it was closer to like 2 or maybe even 2.5, I think maybe. But the thing that keeps me off of this the most, even though I think Abilene Christian does have some reason to be focused because they lost to this team already, to Cal Baptist, and Cal Baptist is one of the better teams in the conference. But Abilene Christian's coming off a big game themselves against, who was it? I think against Stephen F. Austin, maybe, where they won the game, at Stephen F. Austin in a 4th straight road game that they had. So they actually haven't been at home for a while since they played Tarleton, stayed at home on February 1st. So they've been away from home for like 3 weeks, basically, which is crazy. Finally coming back home. I don't think you get like the return home distraction spots as much in college because it's like these guys don't have families yet and whatever. So returning to like dorm life is different from returning to college life. So I think you can be focused a little bit more on college basketball. But Abilene Christian, like I said, they're coming off a nice upset on the road, a 9.5 point upset over Stephen F. Austin. And they actually have Grand Canyon up next. So I just don't want to quite do it there. I don't want to quite get there with that one either. I can't quite do it. But I lean to Abilene Christian fairly strongly in that one. The line isn't quite where I'd want it to be either. The line really kind of getting out of control on Abilene Christian. And KenPom doesn't have them rated very well. Let me see here. Abilene. Let me see. He does have them. He has them and Cal Baptist, I think, both being. I look at the tempo. So actually, he has Abilene Christian being a way faster paced team than Cal Baptist. So that's kind of interesting. Cal Baptist, one of the slowest teams in tempo in KenPom's rankings at 332. So Abilene Christian pushes the pace significantly more at 105 in tempo. So that might actually help Abilene Christian get that game into a faster paced game and maybe throw. Excuse me, who was I even talking about there? Throw whoever their opponent is out of their element there. I'm losing my mind here. Abilene Christian against Cal Baptist. Throw Cal Baptist out of their element there. So I do lean to the Abilene Christian side. I think that one's stronger than the other ones I just mentioned. And I will also just briefly mention that Georgia Southern, I believe, is in kind of a sandwich spot. They just played fairly tough at James Madison, even though they were pretty much losing the whole game. They were still kind of hanging around in that game and losing by single digits pretty late in the game, down by 6 with like 2.5 minutes left. So, and it's going to set up kind of a hangover spot for Georgia Southern. And they really shot well in that game, almost 51% from the floor. So that's a game where, yeah, Cal Baptist, Georgia Southern did play a pretty tough game against James Madison, and they have James Madison again up next. So they're in a JMU sandwich there, James Madison sandwich. So I don't know if they're going to be really in the best spot here, although they've lost 6 games in a row. So it's not like you can really overlook anybody. But they're playing a team, one of the few teams that's below them in the conference, in Texas State, who I don't think they've played this year. I think this is the only time they've played this year. So I lean to Texas State in that one a little bit as well. But Texas State's coming off a pretty ugly loss against Southern Miss, although Southern Miss is better in the conference. And not really an ugly loss. It was a second straight road loss. So they're in a third straight road game, so that would give me a little bit of hesitation to jump in on Texas State there as well. Georgia Southern's actually up from a pick 'em through the 2.5 with juice, but I don't like the spot that Georgia Southern is in. But anyway, what games am I actually on? I'll start with the later of the two games. I think it's the later of the two games. I don't even know if it is, just because I'm kind of looking at it right now on the board, and it's one of the lower conference games and maybe of less interest to people. But if you can make money on it, man, why not jump in? I think this is the strongest out of all those small conference games that I just mentioned. This is Eastern Washington at Northern Arizona. You guys know where I'm going, man. Eastern Washington's up from 7 through the 7.5 with juice at this point. So you can get 7.5 on this. It might even get up towards 8, but there's not much of a difference between 7.5 and 8. I don't know how far it's really going to go. I don't like that the line is moving against me a little bit, but I'm going against Eastern Washington here, man. Eastern Washington has been a hot team. They had won 5 games in a row or something, or 4 games in a row. They'd won 13 of their last 14 games before coming into their previous game. So they were on a real hot streak. They were leading the Big Sky. They're still leading the Big Sky. But in their most recent game, they lost to Weber State at home by 6. Weber State was really controlling the game and beating them by double digits for a lot of the game, really. A huge chunk throughout the middle of the game. And then Eastern Washington made a huge comeback, came all the way back, and I think actually may have gotten into the lead at one point late in the game, or if they didn't, they got really close and at least tied it very close to the end of the game. Weber State's one of the other best teams in that conference in the Big Sky. I think the 2 top teams are Eastern Washington and Weber, even though Weber's in 3rd right now behind Northern Colorado. But that was a big game for Eastern Washington, man. Playing a second game against Weber State, and Eastern Washington had won at Weber State earlier in the season, so Weber State got some road reversal revenge there and went into their house and beat them. But that's a big game, man. A game between the top 2 teams in the conference, and it ended another long, hot streak, win streak for Eastern Washington. Although during that win streak, they did beat both Idaho teams, which is at home, which is not very impressive. Winning on the road at Portland State, a little bit more impressive, but beating both Idaho teams, nobody cares about that. Idaho State and Idaho. Then they ran up against it with Weber State. Weber State played a really good game. That's a tough game. Now, coming off that, they have to go on the road down to Northern Arizona, which is kind of the weirdest spot to have to go to in the Big Sky, really, because most of these teams are kind of up kind of in the northern, mountain area, and a couple of them are a little bit more towards the Pacific, but going down to Northern Arizona is the furthest south, I think, by far. So it's a little bit strange geographically. Kind of a weird spot. Some of these teams have gotten caught going to Northern Arizona. I know I played them once in a nice, easy home upset win for Northern Arizona against one of these. I think against Portland State, maybe, when they were in a bad spot having to go there. But now I think Eastern Washington's in a bad spot off that big game against Weber State, one of the other best teams in the conference. And who do they have after they face Northern Arizona? Who, by the way, they already beat Northern Arizona by 15 at home. And Eastern Washington shot 51% from the field in that game and really dominated the boards in that game. So that gives me a little bit of hesitation because Eastern Washington, even though they shot kind of an outlier percentage, the rebounding edge was very much in their favor. So they did kind of dominate that game, but it was at home. and they're in a bad spot here. So I still kind of like this for Northern Arizona here. And in that game, Eastern Washington, I don't even know what they were favored by. I don't even see the number here on this one, but I would guess that 7.5 is a little bit high on this one. Ken Palm has this right at 7, so I think that's right in line with what I would like to see here. Eastern Washington, very, very fast-paced team. They're not a good defensive team, so actually neither of these teams are good defensively. Eastern Washington, their defense is bad enough that it's not that much worse than Northern Arizona's. Really, Northern Arizona, the much worse offensive team. They really struggled to score a lot of times. And Northern Arizona, they're a bit slower. They're at 132nd in tempo, where Kembum is Eastern Washington, I think in the 40s, 48th. He has both of these teams pretty high in luck, by the way, as well. Both of them amongst the top 50 luckiest teams, so that's kind of a wash. Both teams maybe overperforming record-wise a little bit over what their skill level actually is, but both of these teams not good defensively, and Eastern Washington plays so fast that Northern Arizona might be able to slow it down a little bit and kind of take them out of their element just a little bit, but as I was about to say, in addition to all that, this is a sandwich spot for Eastern Washington. So not only might Northern Arizona be able to slow this game down a little bit, which also helps for a home underdog for sure to come within a big number like this at 7.5. Eastern Washington coming up the huge game against Weber State, but they go to Northern Arizona, who they already beat, so they might take them lightly, especially off a big game against Weber State. But who do they have next? They have to go on the road to Northern Colorado, who's right behind them in the conference, only 2 games behind them now, actually sitting in second in the conference. So that's a much bigger game. And then they have Montana and Montana State following that. And those are teams that have been they're both been near the top of the Big Sky for many years. In the recent years. Montana State was the conference winner last year. Montana's kind of always one of the better teams in this conference. So those are bigger games as well. And they actually, they lost to Montana State on the road the first time they played them. They won at Montana the first time they played them. But still, those are all bigger games. So this is a sandwich spot going to Northern Arizona, sandwiched in between Weber State and then Northern Colorado, Montana, and Montana State, all up on the horizon. So, and having already beaten Northern Arizona, I think it's a spot where Eastern Washington could overlook Northern Arizona. So that's the first of these 2 plays that I'm making in college basketball here. And the other play is going to be, it looks like the market's moved down a little bit on this, is going to be Minnesota minus 3.5. This looks like it's gone down from 4 to 3.5. So the market movement has gone against it a little bit, but I like I think the number's fine because Ken Palm has both teams, Minnesota and Ohio State, in the 60s. He has Ohio State, only the slightly better team. So Minnesota being a 3.5-point favorite, basically getting a home court, maybe not even quite home court because I think their home court is actually fairly strong. I think that's pretty good. The line's pretty good on Minnesota there. I think it's right about where it should be, which is also interesting because Minnesota has been crushing the spread this year, man. I think they're now 22-3 against the spread this year, which is just completely insane, which kind of makes me not want to be on them because you think the market has to adjust to them at some point. But with a number where it is here, I think it's kind of right in line where it should be. But you might think, well, the public's going to come in and look and say, well, wait a minute, Minnesota has the better record. They're better than Ohio State. So aren't they going to look at this? And doesn't it look like it's kind of even a short line with Minnesota having the much better record? I'm not so sure about that because Minnesota's not being talked about as even being on the playoff bubble. Ohio State certainly carries more of name recognition, more weight behind their name. So that might mitigate all of that a little bit because Ohio State tends to be the more public team in name. I don't think people think Minnesota's really that good. They haven't looked quite as good as of late, losing a decent amount of their recent games. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be that much of it's going to have that much of an effect there. I don't expect the public to be that massively on Minnesota. Maybe they'll be on them a little bit, but Minnesota's coming off a win over Rutgers. Nobody's really going to care about that. Rutgers is below them in the conference. Everybody expected Minnesota to win that game. They're a home favorite in that game. But people see what Ohio State's done recently, even though Ohio State's near the bottom of the conference. Again, like I said, their overall record doesn't look that bad, really. It doesn't look that much worse than Minnesota's. And people might think, well, Ohio State, what did they just do? They just played Wisconsin tough, and they just beat Purdue. So they lost only by 8 on the road at Wisconsin, and then they beat Purdue. So people are going to look at that and think, well, if Ohio State can beat Purdue, man, and Minnesota, of course, just lost to Purdue, although they played them pretty tough not too long ago. They lost at Purdue by 8, and I think it was an overtime. Very tough game for Minnesota there. But people are going to see Ohio State beat Purdue and think, well, that means Ohio State can be competitive here, and we're getting points, and they only have the somewhat worse record than Minnesota, and we don't think that Minnesota's that good. Ohio State has more name recognition. I think that might be what the recreational bettors might think about this. So I think Minnesota might not be that public here, even though the record's a bit better. And in some ways, it might look like the line is a little bit short. I don't really think so because of what Ohio State's coming off of, and Minnesota coming off an easier win over Rutgers, really. I don't think anybody's going to care that much about beating Rutgers. Beating Minnesota, though, would be something, or beating Ohio State, I mean, for Minnesota would be something a bit of a bigger deal, I think, for Minnesota, because Ohio State still carries that name recognition, but also Ohio State already beat Minnesota this year at Ohio State, I believe, which Ohio State was a 13.5-point favorite back then, which this is before we kind of knew like what these teams were. So that line was way, way off from what it should have been. But Ohio State won the game early in the season by 10 points. So they won and actually didn't cover. But now you get a situation where Minnesota, it might be a little bit of revenge even. And maybe Ohio State might even take Minnesota a little bit lightly because they already beat them by 10. And they're coming off the game against Purdue, man. So that's really the main factor here. This is a huge letdown spot, of course. This is the type of game I'm going to be on. In college basketball, Ohio State just beat the number 2 ranked team in the country, the top team in the Big Ten, one of the like undisputed top teams in college basketball. Ohio State just beat them, rushed the court. Huge, huge win against Purdue. 2 big games in a row against Wisconsin and Purdue. Now coming off that, they go to Minnesota. Not an easy place to play at all. Minnesota's been a covering machine, and Ohio State beat Minnesota earlier this year. Of course, that was a game where Minnesota actually covered the spread, but Ohio State probably had no business being favored by anywhere near as much as they were favored by in that game. So maybe that the Minnesota against the spread record has maybe a little bit of misleading. There might be a little bit misleading in there because Minnesota probably should not have covered a line in that game if the line was actually where it should have been in that game. And then Minnesota, they've had a couple of recent losses where they covered the spread but lost against Purdue and Iowa, where they maybe shouldn't have even covered against Iowa when it came down to it at the end there. But all that being said, yeah, Ohio State's coming off a huge win over Purdue, having to go to Minnesota, a team they already beat by double digits at home, and they have Michigan State up next, and it's going to be their only matchup against Michigan State this season. I think that's a big game as well, man. When you got Tom Izzo up next, you got Tom Izzo on the horizon. I think this is even a sandwich spot for Ohio State. Michigan State's always a big game for these Big Ten teams like this. You're coming off your monster win of the year type of thing against Purdue, having to go to Minnesota. Minnesota's just kind of sitting in wait, having not even had to travel. I believe they just won their previous game at home, so they're just sitting around waiting for Ohio State to come in, a team that already beat them once this year. I like Minnesota in this one, -3.5. That's going to do it for that. The NBA is back in action. Trying to get this done quickly here. Maybe this video will wind up being a little bit quicker if I can get this done. NBA, we're returning from the All-Star break, of course. So this is a situation where you kind of want to look for teams that went into the All-Star break hot, and you want to go kind of against those teams because the All-Star break, getting all that time off kind of functions like a bye in the NFL or something like that. If you went into that break hot, like you don't really have any changes to make. You don't have any adjustments to make, and it might really just disrupt your momentum. Whereas you kind of want to be on teams that went in on a lower note, because those are the teams that are going to be actually adjusting things and taking that time during the break to make adjustments because they have the adjustments to make. So you want to be on teams that went into that break on a bad note. So looking at the market here, it's a big NBA slate, but I've just narrowed it down to just having one play in the NBA here that I kind of like. Even though I might have a few other leans, I do kind of lean against the Sacramento Kings just because I think they went in on a pretty good note going into the, I think they beat I think they beat the Denver Nuggets in their last game going into the breaks. That's a pretty big win. Yeah, even though they lost 2 games before that, they beat the Nuggets 2 out of their last 4 games and played the last 3 on the road, losing to Oklahoma City and then losing to Phoenix pretty competitively, losing to 2 good teams, then beating the Nuggets, and then going into the All-Star break, beating the Nuggets, have to come out of the All-Star break and face the San Antonio Spurs. So I think went into the All-Star break on a loss streak because, of course, they did. The Spurs are awful. So I think the Spurs are going to be in the much more positive spot, the spot where they're going to have readjusted. And Sacramento has the LA Clippers up next. So that's a much bigger game for Sacramento. So I lean against Sacramento, but I'm not actually going to do this one. It's down from 11.5 to 9 now. So it looks like the market is moving in that direction. 55% of the cash and 54% of tickets on the Spurs. So even though they're a little bit public, they have the cash discrepancy on the Spurs a little bit there. But the game I'm actually on in the NBA is going to be on the Houston Rockets against the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans sitting at 7. You can get Houston plus 7 right now. Pretty much everywhere. The line's kind of just sitting there, which is interesting. Pelicans have 86% of tickets, but only 71% of the cash. So as of right now, at least they're public, but the cash discrepancy is going against the Pelicans. So they are public because they're one of the better teams in the NBA at this point, man. They're leading the Southwest Division, which is also Houston's division. They're 8.5 games ahead of Houston. Houston went into the break on a pretty sour note. They lost 5 of their last 6 games, although they did win against the Knicks in their second to last game, but still losing 5 of your last 6, that's not good. And losing to some teams that aren't really that good in there either, but most of them were on the road. All of those games, all of the losses were actually on the road. The one win was at home against the Knicks. All the rest of the losses were on the road, but losing to the Raptors, the Hawks, and the Grizzlies, that's all ugly, man. And then went into the All-Star break having lost to the Grizzlies. I think they're going to be focused coming out of the All-Star break. They have some decent coaching. Houston's not really a pushover. They're an okay team, really, and I think they'll have some decent adjustments that they've made. And the thing that makes me like this a little bit more also is that they just played the Pelicans not that long ago at home, and the Pelicans just tore them to shreds. The Pelicans beat them by 21 or something, or excuse me, was it 21? No, it was 11, excuse me. Math. They beat them by double digits, though, in Houston. So I think Houston's going to want to kind of flip the script there and go on the road and play a better game at New Orleans. And New Orleans just came into their house not that long ago and beat them. So I like all of that. It's a little bit of in-season revenge, a little bit of quick turnaround, road reversal revenge for Houston, which might add a little bit of motivation to Houston, but also might make New Orleans overlook Houston a little bit. Houston they are going to have made adjustments during the break, man, because they went into the break on a pretty bad note. Like I said, losing like 5 of their last 6, losing all those road games. Although, yes, this game is also on the road. People are also going to see they just lost at Memphis, and New Orleans just won at Memphis in their second to last game before the break. So people are going to do the syllogism thing. I think this is pretty easy to take New Orleans here. They're the better team. They just beat the Grizzlies, who also just beat Houston. So this is easy, man, right? Just lay the points with New Orleans. I don't really think so. New Orleans won 3 games going into the All-Star breaks. They were on a nice winning note, but those games were against the Trailblazers, the Grizzlies, and the Wizards. Those are 3 pretty bad teams, so that's not an impressive win streak they put together there. It was impressive that they beat the Clippers prior to losing to the Lakers, but these wins that they racked up, they won a lot of games going into the All-Star break. Man, they won 7 of their last 8, but aside from the Clippers win, they beat the Rockets, like I said, on the road, crushed them, so that's going to maybe cause them to overlook the Rockets a little bit. They beat San Antonio, Toronto, Portland, Memphis, and Washington. That's all not impressive at all. They beat up on all the worst teams in the league, basically leading into this. So I think that the All-Star break is going to be a bit of a momentum stopper for them. So I don't like it. I think the Rockets are going to use the All-Star break to readjust. I think it's going to hurt New Orleans a bit. And yeah, I just like the spot a lot better for the Rockets to have made the adjustments coming out of the All-Star break. New Orleans went in hot, so I think the All-Star break might just cool them off a bit. And New Orleans also plays tomorrow against the Miami Heat, which is certainly going to be a bit of a bigger game than this one is. The Heat, much better record, even though they're in the Eastern Conference. I think they could overlook the Rockets, having just beaten them easily in Houston. Houston might be more motivated here, being behind them by 8.5 in their division here. So I like Houston plus the 7. That's the only NBA play. And then going to the NHL, it's kind of unfortunate that some of these teams that are in bad spots are just kind of facing other teams in bad spots. Like, I kind of would want to go against the Avalanche because I don't think they're in a good spot. They just pulled off a nice win over Vancouver. Now they have to go to Detroit, which is not a great travel spot, having to travel out of elevation and go to Detroit. But Detroit's returning from a long road trip that took them to the Pacific Northwest. So I can't get involved with Detroit there, man. It's not a good spot for the Red Wings either. So got to lay off of that one. So nothing I want to do with that. I don't like the spot that the Rangers are in, so I do lean to the New Jersey Devils. The Rangers had that big win against the Islanders where they came back and beat the Islanders. It's kind of a rivalry game, even though the Islanders haven't been that good this year. Rivalry game, and it was the Stadium Series, so kind of a big game at MetLife there. It was kind of a heavily advertised game, a step-up game, and coming out of that, a nice comeback win there. They also beat the Dallas Stars, so the Rangers are coming out of a couple of nice games. Around a huge win streak, a 7 or 8 game win streak or whatever it is here. And they have Philadelphia up next, which might be a little bit of a bigger game as well. I think the only time they faced New Jersey this year, they beat them on the road at New Jersey. So all of that makes me think this is a bigger game for New Jersey. Could be a bit of a letdown spot for for the New York Rangers here. New Jersey's coming off a real ugly game where they lost 6-2 to the Washington Capitals. So I do like New Jersey in this one. Actually, maybe I'll play New Jersey because it's gone up from -102 to -113. They have 56% of the cash, 96% of the tickets on the other side on the New York Rangers. Are we going to wind up with 2 hockey plays today? I do like, all that makes me like. I think it's a bounce back spot for the Devils here, and I think it's a bad spot for the Rangers. So let me see. Should I jump in on the Devils here? Maybe I will. The line looks like it's kind of moving in that direction. You can still kind of get New Jersey at -115 about there. So yeah, all right. I mean, I think we can do New Jersey and then -113. Is that what I said? Yeah. You can get them somewhere around that price. So I like that one. And then let me see. What was the other game? I was going to mention one other game where I have at least a lean in hockey. Let me see. I lean against the Islanders. This one looks like it's flipped to the Islanders being a favorite from +107 to -110 with 97% of the cash and 93% of the tickets. So it looks like they have the cash discrepancy, even though they are public as well. And the line is moving in their direction. So I'm not going to touch that one, but I don't like the Islanders in that game, really. They're coming off 2 big games. The game I just mentioned where they blew that big lead against the Rangers in the Stadium Series at MetLife there in a big game, big rivalry game against a good team. Played tough and just wound up not being able to win in the end, losing to the Rangers. Thought they were in a bad spot coming out of that. Went on the road and they were able to get the win, unfortunately for me, blowing a 4-2 lead late in that game and then still winning in overtime, even though at that point I thought Pittsburgh had all the momentum. So coming out of that, those 2 games, a big win over the Penguins there, and having to go out to St. Louis, doesn't seem like a very good spot for the Islanders. And they have Tampa Bay, Dallas up next. Those are bigger games, I think, as well. St. Louis winning record, but not like the greatest team here. St. Louis on a 2-game loss streak, so they might be in more of a bounce back spot. They've had 2 days off, so I like the spot better for St. Louis. So the market doesn't look to be in agreement with it, but I think they can use that time off to kind of break that like losing momentum that they have there. So I like the St. Louis Blues in that one, just a lean in that one. To break their loss streak there. They're in a bounce back spot and have more rest there, whereas I think the Islanders are coming off 2 bigger games where I think they might be in a bit of a hangover spot there, maybe a letdown or whatever for sure. So I don't understand why the market's going against that one, but I lean to St. Louis. The other game I'm actually on is I'm going to be unfortunately fading my Boston Bruins. This spot is really awful for the Bruins. There's only one thing that gives me any hesitation here, and that is that Calgary did just go into Boston and beat Boston not very long ago. Went in and beat them 4-1. So that gives me a little hesitation. And when I'm going to say this is a sandwich spot, Boston has Vancouver next. Boston did beat Vancouver 4-0 in Boston. So is that going to make Boston be like less focused on the Vancouver game that's coming up? I don't think so, because going to Vancouver, I mean, that's a big game. It's a big rematch from the 2011 Stanley Cup Finals, man, where the Bruins won their only Stanley Cup win of my lifetime, which I enjoyed thoroughly when that happened. But I think it's a big game for Vancouver, for Boston, still going to Vancouver. So I do think this is going to be a sandwich spot, but everything about this just has me on Calgary here, except for the fact that it's a little bit of revenge for Boston. But I think everything else about this game is going to really not have like, if you're taking revenge into account here, I think you're going to be overweighting it way too much, I would say, or overweighing it, whatever. Boston, the market looks like it's in agreement with me on Calgary. Boston's down from -130 to -123 is the road favorite. 94% of the tickets, 89% of the cash. So a heavily public road favorite with reverse line movement going against them, and the cash discrepancy looking like it's also against them. So I like all that. The market is indicating on Calgary. You can get Calgary at around +112 right now. Nice underdog price at home underdog price. what's the spot that Boston is in? They just played last night, dude. So they have no rest. They're playing a third game in 4 days, all in different cities. And what have they done recently? They've won 2 in a row. Before that, they lost 4 in a row. But in their last 4 games, their last 5 games, they played 3 of them into overtime. No, 4 of the last 5 games they played into overtime or shootout. That's crazy, dude. They lost at home to Tampa in a shootout, lost at home to Seattle, lost at home in overtime to the LA Kings, won at home in a shootout against Dallas over on Monday on President's Day, and then 2 days later have to go out on the road into Edmonton, which is where they were last night. Bruins had a 4-1 lead in that game. I had that game on, and they blew the entire lead. It was 4-4. They retook the lead. They actually, I believe they never trailed in the entire game. They blew the 4-1 lead. It was tied 4-4. They took a 5-4 lead in the third period, and then it was tied again. Went into overtime. The Bruins were still able to get it done and win. Big win in a barn burner, 6-5 overtime game over Edmonton. Huge win. And now they have to turn around and play again. Second straight road game, back-to-back road games, third game in 4 days, all in different cities. A lot of travel there, no time off, really. Is that, like, is there anything good about the spot besides the fact that, yeah, the Bruins did lose at home to Calgary back on the 6th? I don't think that's going to matter that much. That game, those games against Dallas and Edmonton were much bigger. Those are both barn burners. 4-3 shootout win at home, and then 2 days later, last night, a 6-5 overtime win in Edmonton, a very high-scoring, crazy barn burner of a game, and then up in 2 days from now, they have to go to Vancouver. Even though Calgary did just beat them, I think they're going to overlook Calgary, dude. It's an awful spot for the Bruins here for all the reasons I just said. It's a sandwich, despite the fact that it's a little bit of revenge here. No time off, coming off all these overtime and shootout games, barn burner game last night, bad travel spot. This is just awful. So even though the other thing that actually gives me a little bit of hesitation is that Calgary's kind of in a little bit of a letdown spot because they did just beat Winnipeg, which is a big win back on Monday the 19th, winning 6-3. But that broke a 3-game loss streak for them. So I think that's good that it broke a loss streak for them. So even though it is a big win over Winnipeg, and they do have Edmonton up next, which is also a big game in 2 days, are they really going to overlook Boston, even though they did just win in Boston? So will that have them overlooking Boston? Probably not, because they know how good Boston is, and they saw what Boston did last night. So I don't think they're going to be unfocused with one of the best teams in hockey still coming into their house. I don't think you overlook Boston, even if you did beat them already once. So I think it's a better spot for Calgary, even though they are coming off a nice win over Winnipeg. I don't think they're going to overlook a team as good as Boston, despite having beat them, like I said. So I still like it for Calgary. The spot is just awful for the Bruins. I don't know if they're going to be able to overcome so many negatives about the spot for them. Calgary has no travel, and they have 2 days off. This spot is so much better for Calgary, and you're getting them as an underdog price at home, even though, yeah, the Bruins are the better team. But are they that much the better team that they should be laying a price like this on the road in a spot like this? Yeah, probably not. So we'll be on Calgary there, and that's going to do it for me, man. So these games today, trying to be a bit selective here. But we do still have, 5 plays, I guess, today. So in college basketball, we got Minnesota -3.5, Northern Arizona +7.5. In the NBA, just Houston +7, taking it slow coming out of the All-Star break because we don't have as many great situations to look for yet in a spot like that. And then in the NHL, the New Jersey Devils -113 and Calgary Flames +112. It's going to do it for me, man. Have a good Thursday. Peace.